heart feels like a rock in my chest. My body screams at me about the abuse I put it through over the last 4 decades. Parts of me I can't even pronounce are complaining about how badly I've treated them. And despite the mob of extras milling around the base of the building, hundreds of Dutch Marines and firefighters and police looking nervously up at the sky, I think to myself, is this jump really necessary? But the answer is there as soon as I ask the question. Yes, because this jump is special. It isn't just for the fans and the critics and the box office charts. This one is for the man who made it possible for me to stand here today, aching and shivering in the spotlight. This is for my master, Yu Yuan, who was buried a week ago in Los Angeles. I remember a frightened 7-year-old walking into the dark and musty hall of the China Drama Academy, holding his father's hand. Inside, he sees young boys and girls leaping and tumbling and screaming. Paradise. How long do you want to stay here, Jackie? Forever, answered the boy, his eyes bright and wide, and he lets go of his father to clutch at the hem of his master's robe. For the next 10 years, I sweated and cried and bled under master's hands. I cursed his name when I went to sleep at night, and I swallowed my fear and hatred of him when I woke in the morning. He asked for everything we had, and we gave it to him, under pain of injury or even death. But when we came of age, we realized he'd given it all back, with interest. It was Master Yu Yuan who created Jackie Chan, and I do what I do today, I am what I am today, because of him. And so this leap is in his memory, a final act of gratitude, a last gesture of defiance. Someone slaps me on the back, asks me if I'm ready. I nod, barely understanding. Another voice calls for quiet on the set, and suddenly the only sound is the wind and the blood rushing in my ears, and my heart beginning to pound like a giant drum. Camera, rolling, action. And I suck in my churning stomach, launch myself into the sky. I fly. I remember. I was born on April 7th, 1954, the only son of Charles and Lily Chan. They named me Chen Kong-san, which means born in Hong Kong Chen. I guess my parents weren't very original when it came to names. By the Chinese calendar, 1954 was the year of the horse. According to superstition, the horse is a sign of energy, ambition, and success, and my parents were happy that I came into the world under such a fortunate sign. Of course, my arrival in the year of the horse was hardly a coincidence. Actually, it took an awful lot of stubbornness on my part to pull it off. Most babies are born 9 months after being conceived. I, on the other hand, stuck around an extra 3 months until my mother was forced to go to a surgeon to bring me into the world, kicking and screaming by cesarean section. Maybe it was my rebellious streak that made me refuse to join my parents on time, or maybe it was a premonition of what my future would hold. After all, while comfortably inside my mother, I had privacy, sleep, and all the food I could ever ask for without having to fight or work or suffer. In fact, I can honestly say that those 3 extra months were the easiest time of my life. Nothing like that waited for me in the world outside. Hong Kong in the 50s was a hard and restless place, and my family's position there was at the very bottom of the social ladder among the thousands of destitute migrants who'd fled to the British colony after the mainland's communist revolution. Still, as poor as we were, we felt lucky to have survived China's civil war, and especially grateful that my parents had good jobs in the strange new society of the island. Many of our fellow refugees had arrived in Hong Kong with nothing but the clothes on their back and the memories of what they had left behind. They lived in shacks in the island's crowded ghettos, making paper flowers and cheap trinkets to survive, or turning to less socially accepted and more dangerous pursuits. We managed to be among the lucky ones. Soon after coming to the island, my father and mother had found employment with the French ambassador to Hong Kong, a kind gentleman with a warm and caring family. Dad became the master's cook and handyman. My mother was the housekeeper. And so, when I was born, I found myself not on the tough streets of lower Hong Kong, but in a mansion on the exclusive slopes of Victoria Peak, the home of the wealthy, the famous, the powerful, and me. I don't recall the house itself too well. It was big, I remember, and very grand. In the front rooms, well-dressed Westerners would chat and take tea or listen to music. Upstairs, the ambassador's family had their quarters, huge rooms with high ceilings and windows that open out onto the lights of the city below. But I didn't see these parts of the house very often. These were a different world from the one in which my family lived. Our place was the rear of the mansion, divided from the air and light of the front by a small door. Our room was tiny, and it was not what you would probably consider comfortable. There were no windows, and the walls and floor were clean but bare. The furniture had all been made by my father's hands, and there wasn't much of it. A bunk bed, some benches, and a storage trunk. My parents slept together in the top bunk of the bed, and I slept in the bottom one. This was all the home I knew for the first 6 years of my life, and I was happy there, despite the cramped quarters and the simple furnishings. Actually, I didn't know at the time just how good I had it. The next place I'd call home would make our small room seem like a palace. I mentioned that I started giving trouble to my parents even before I was born. Of all the crazy stunts I've done, in my opinion, nothing compares to my mom's achievement. Surviving nearly an entire year of pregnancy, then giving birth to a healthy baby who weighed 12 pounds at delivery. Both my parents were shocked when I finally arrived. My father said he'd never seen such a big baby in his life. He and Mom nicknamed me Pao Pao, which is Chinese for cannonball. There was sound arrival, of course. The bill for my mother's surgery came to 500 Hong Kong dollars, and my parents' savings didn't come close to covering that cost. But the lady doctor who performed the surgery must have been impressed by me too, because afterwards, she approached my nervous father with a deal. She had no kids of her own, she explained to him, and she knew he and my mother had no money. If my father would allow her to adopt me, she would be willing to pay for the cost of the surgery and my mother's hospital stay, and even give my parents an additional adoption fee of 1,500 Hong Kong dollars. I'm not angry about the fact that my father thought long and hard about the offer. $2,000 was a lot of money back then, and poor children were regularly given to more wealthy friends and relatives to bring up in those days. Maybe it would have even been for the best, because the lady doctor would have brought me up in style. But I was my parents' only son. I was a symbol of their new start in Hong Kong. I was born under a lucky sign, and I was big and healthy. My father went home and talked about the doctor's offer with some of his friends, who all said the same thing. There was something special about me, the 12-month, 12-pound baby, and if I grew up to be a great man, my father would always regret giving me up. Dad's friends lent him the money to pay off the hospital debt. And after thanking the doctor for her skillful surgery and her generous offer, he took my mother and me home to the big house on the peak. Because bringing me into the world was so expensive, Dad was especially adamant about raising me up as a properly disciplined man, even if he had to knock me sideways to do it. Each morning he'd rise when dawn was just a hair-thin line of light on the horizon, leaving my mother still dozing. Leaping to the ground from his bunk as softly as possible, he'd shake me roughly awake. Up, it's morning. Up, up, up. If I complained too much or rolled away, he'd just grab me by the waist and pull me out of bed in a tangle of sheets and arms. When I was lucky, I'd get my feet under me before the rest of me hit the floor. When I wasn't, well, at least I learned how to take a fall. A good lesson for the future. Like any survivor, my father was a jack of all trades, an accomplished amateur carpenter and handyman. Out of stray pieces of wood and recycled rubbish rice sacks, rope, and large cans that still smelled faintly of cooking oil, he'd made a makeshift gym, and we would greet sunrise with a workout that left me breathless and soaked with perspiration. We would run, lift bags filled with sand, do military-style push-ups, and spend hours practicing martial arts. Though I was just 4 or 5 years old, already my father was teaching me the basics of northern-style kung fu. It may seem strange that such a young child would be learning how to fight. You have to remember, though, that to us Chinese, kung fu isn't just a means of self-defense. The techniques of kung fu build the character traits that lead to greatness, strength, patience, courage, and subtlety. My father believed this more than anyone. To him, learning kung fu was the same as learning how to be a man. And frankly, I was a big disappointment. Lazy and impatient by nature, at first I practiced under his watchful eye only out of the fear that if I didn't, he'd demonstrate his techniques on me, his useless son. Worse yet, when I finally realized that his training was making me strong, tough, and a fearsome opponent for any kid stupid enough to get in my way, I brought my dad's worst nightmare to life. I went from being a brat to being a brawler. I found out quickly that fighting was fun, when you won anyway, and it soon became one of my favorite hobbies, next to eating. The first time my dad found me seated on the screaming body of one of the neighboring boys, bruised but crowing victory, he grabbed me by the scruff of my neck and pulled me into the house. "Dad, I won!" I shouted, causing my mother to peek her head out of the laundry room in alarm. "What's wrong, Dad? I won!" I said, my voice trembling. His eyes flashed, and I flinched away from him. "I did not teach you kung fu so you could beat up your friends," he said, eyes dripping from his words. "I am teaching you how to fight so that you will never have to fight at all." Thinking back to those few years living on the peak, I'd have to say I was happy. So it came as a nasty surprise when my father told me my days of innocence were coming to an end. "School?" I shouted, stomping my foot in rage. School was the place where the neighbors' kids wasted all the best parts of the day. It meant dressing up in sissy clothes, spending hours in a stifling classroom, and learning things that were of no use to anyone. I could learn everything I needed to right here at home, probably more. Of course, like other arguments I had with my father, this one was a complete waste of time, and so a few days later, I found myself taking my first bus ride down the peak to the Nanhua Elementary Academy. Nanhua was a very good school, one of the best in the area, and I was extremely lucky to have the chance to go there. I hated it from the instant I walked through the schoolyard gates. Every minute I spent there was torture, except for lunch hour and occasionally gym. Trapped in the classroom with nothing to do but puzzle at the words in my texts or listen to the droning voice of the teacher. The boredom forced me to find ways of amusing myself. I'd make faces at other students, or thumb rhythms on the desk with my palms, or fall out of my chair by accident over and over again. After a few noisy but enjoyable disruptions, the teacher would usually drag me out into the hall. "Chen Kong Song," she'd tell me, "you'll never amount to anything." Actually, now I regret not having paid more attention in school. You can't ever go back again, and I'll never know the pleasures of the classics or higher mathematics or the great lessons of history. Once in a while, I wonder what would have happened if I took the other path, the one that led to high school and college and a respectable career in business, or maybe law or medicine. I could have been the world's most famous doctor instead of the world's most famous patient. I never did get the hang of being a student. I ended up being told that I'd have to repeat the first year of primary school. And even if I wasn't learning anything, my parents were. They were beginning to realize that their son was not the scholarly type. My parents pulled me out of school, and I went back to my old routine of following around my mom and getting under my dad's skin. And that was the end of my academic career. I guess I thought I was pretty smart getting out of school that way. However, the last laugh would be on me. My father's cooking and my mother's housekeeping had impressed the ambassador's friends to no end. Other job offers had come up. One of them was too good to pass up, a job as head cook for the American embassy in Australia. Not only would the job pay more money, it would also give us the chance to get Australia residency, maybe even a chance someday to move to the United States. But taking a job in Australia would mean leaving the family behind, at least for the time being. While my mom was a strong woman, I was too much for her to handle while performing the duties of her job. Finally, Dad, a guy's guide to the bone, Went back to the traditional source of advice for men all over the world, his drinking buddies. They'd helped him decide to keep me, even lending my dad money to pay for my mother's operation. Now they suggest a way of getting rid of me for my own good. It's a hard life, but a good one. He'll get some discipline. Maybe he'll even become a star. And they all shared a hearty laugh. But the decision was made. My dad would take me to the place that would become my home for the next decade of my life, Yuan Yuan's China Drama Academy. There was no warning at all. It just happened. Here we are, Pao Pao, he said, with an odd catch in his voice. The sign before us proclaimed the building we were about to enter as the China Drama Academy, a name that told me nothing. My father swung the knocker on the outer door, and we waited silently on the stoop. Soon the door swung open, revealing the bald head of a husky teenager, a boy perhaps 15 years of age, on the heavy side, but thick with muscle. What is it? He said, wiping beads of perspiration from his brow. He stared at my father with suspicion until he noticed me standing on the lower stoop. Oh, another one, snorted the boy. Funny-looking kid, mister. Bring us to Master Yu, my father said. The boy shrugged, then turned and walked inside, motioning us to follow. Behind the door was a small courtyard, clean but sparsely decorated. Then came another door, from which issued the muffled sound of voices, numbers being chanted in unison by a high-pitched chorus. Behind that door was an amazing sight, a large, open room in which 20 or so boys and girls dressed in identical white and black outfits filled the hall with a wild blur of motion. Some performed martial arts forms in tight, coordinated routines. Others practiced somersaults and other acrobatic maneuvers. Still others engaged in mock combat with swords, spears, and sticks. For a hyperactive young boy brought up on stories of swashbuckling swordsmen and the warrior monks of the Shaolin Temple, this was paradise. My father nodded his head in approval as an older man in a blue robe and a black practice pants approached. You must be Mr. Chen, the man said, shaking my father's hand and bowing with graceful precision. I am Yuan Yuan, the master of this academy. Your fame precedes you, Master Yu, my father responded, returning the bow. I have long wanted to meet you. And this is, said Master Yu. This is my son, Chen Kongseng, Dad said, pushing me forward. Master Yu leaned down, putting his hands on his knees. Hello, Kongseng, he said. You seem like a healthy boy. And then to my father, is he fit? Any bad habits? He's never been ill, and he's had no major injuries, my father said. As for bad habits, I suppose that's why we're here. Master Yu nodded silently. I was paying very little attention to the discussion, just half listening while staring at the whirling bodies before me. Finally, the temptation was too much. Dad, I said, tugging on his jacket, can I go play too? My father looked at me with annoyance. Can't you be still for just one moment? Master Yu gazed at me warmly, waving his arms in the direction of the others. Go play, young man. I will bring your father to drink tea. Taking my father's arm, he assured him I'd be all right, and patted my head as I ran past them towards a set of boys dueling with spears. I spent the rest of the day with the other children, practicing kicks, swinging weapons, and vying to copy their elaborate poses and stances. Everyone was very kind to me, teaching me small things and laughing without malice when I made mistakes. I liked everyone on site. Well, almost everyone. There was the teenager who met us at the door, the boy named Yuan Long, whom everyone addressed as Big Brother, when they spoke to him at all. He moved with authority throughout the room, finding minute faults and dishing out verbal abuse to those stupid enough to make the same mistake twice. Then, while showing me how to do an aerial backflip, a move that led me to clap my hands and shout with glee, one of the boys crashed into a pair of girls who were playing an elaborate clapping game nearby. The girls weren't hurt, but Yuan Long's face still went red with rage. As the boy trembled, Yuan Long raised his hand above his head, then looked in my direction and slowly lowered it to his side. His eyes wet with relief, the boy apologized repeatedly to the girls and to Big Brother, who grunted at him to be more careful in the future. Yuan Long stepped toward me, scowling. Listen, kid, he said, his voice low and dangerous. You may think this is all fun and games, but this is what we eat, drink, and dream. This is our lives. Reaching back, he executed a perfect backflip, landing neatly on the balls of his feet. You just remember what I said. He turned and stalked away. I wasn't stupid. Yuan Long, whatever his position here at the academy, was a force to be reckoned with. And somehow, though all I'd done was watch, I'd made an enemy. A very bad enemy, indeed. I ate dinner with the students, sitting at the head of the table right next to the master and talking breathlessly about all the things I tried and learned that day. This had been the best day of my life. I never had so much fun playing all day, eating as much as I wanted, roughhousing with children my age. When my father finally came to pick me up and bringing me home, I almost told him I didn't want to leave. As Dad and Master Yu exchanged farewells and some other pleasantries, I jumped around the empty hall, kicking at imaginary enemies. Outside, in the academy courtyard, my father patted me on the head with unaccustomed affection. So, Abao, did you enjoy yourself today? He asked. Yes, I shouted, the word echoing in the empty court. I want to come back tomorrow. Can I, Dad? My father nodded silently to himself as we walked through the growing evening crowds of Jinsazui. A week later, I was shaken awake from a deep and heavy sleep. Mom? My mother sat down on the bunk next to me, smoothing out the cover with one hand and tousling my hair with the other. Did you sleep well, Bao? Where's Dad? Your father is cooking breakfast. She paused, folding her hands in her lap. He thought you could use some extra rest. Hearing this was like watching the sun go up in the west, or seeing cows and pigs soaring through the sky. It was unnatural. Is Dad hurt? My mother blinked. Your father is fine. Everything is absolutely fine, Papa. Really. But her cheeks were wet, and I didn't believe her. I knew that something was wrong. I sat up and hugged my mother tight, my heart pounding. And then I saw the suitcase sitting next to the bed. It was a small canvas bag that I recognized as my mother's, but I knew it wasn't packed for her. I was going somewhere, and there was only one place I could possibly go, back to the academy. And this time, I wouldn't be going to play. I'd be going to stay. On the entire trip over, my mother was silent. My father spent the time explaining to me that he had to go on a trip and might be away for a long time. To make sure my mother would not be too tired, I'd have to stay with people who could properly take care of a growing boy. I was hardly listening. I was so excited I couldn't sit still. No more punishments, no more chores, no more morning workouts, no more school. Forever. Master Yu was waiting for us when we arrived. Welcome, Kong-sung. We hope you will enjoy your stay here. On the long table was a scroll of paper. It was covered with writing that I couldn't read, so I ignored it. But my father immediately picked it up, holding it close to his face. My mother threaded her arm through his and looked over his shoulder. I believe it is all in order, Mr. and Mrs. Chen, said the master, drawing a chair for my father to sit. And very standard. After you sign, I will have complete responsibility for the boy as long as he is here. I will feed, clothe, and shelter him at my own expense. I will provide for his care and protection, and I will give him the finest training in the world in an art that surpasses all others, the art of Chinese opera. My father sat down. I wandered away to examine the rack of weapons. Perhaps he will even become a star, he added, smiling, as I drew a long tassel sword, swinging it around my head. This agreement says that you have the right to keep any money he earns? My father said. We support the academy with performances, the master answered. My students receive the benefit of our teaching, and in turn, their skills allow our teaching to continue. This is traditional and only proper. My father picked up the pen as I tripped, while running back to the table, dropping the sword with a clatter. The master's cheek twitched. It also says that you may discipline the boy, my mother said, her voice shaking. That you may discipline the boy even to death? Yes. Discipline is the soul of our art, said Master Yu. It is said that discipline is at the root of manhood. Is it not so? Dad made a strangled sound at the back of his throat. Some of the other students had come into the room, and I was showing off my sword stances to one of the younger girls, making her laugh. Papa, listen, he said, interrupting my demonstration. What, Dad? How long do you want to stay here? He asked. You can stay 5 years, 7 years, forever, I shouted. My mother squeezed my father's arm so hard that her hands went white. The longest term is 10 years, said the master, taking the pen and writing the number on the scroll. My father signed at the bottom. Then the master took his personal seal and made his mark over my father's name. The deal was done. I didn't realize it at the time, but from that day on, and for the next decade of my life, I will be the property of the China Drama Academy and Master Yan Yuan. Shortly after the document was signed, my parents called me away from the small group of other students with whom I'd been playing. My father squatted down on his knees. Kong-sung, he said, calling me by my given name. You are a big boy now, big enough to take care of yourself. I know you will make us proud. And with that, he gave me one last quick hug and stood. I swallowed hard, telling myself that I was headed for fun and freedom and that I really wouldn't miss my mom and dad that much. My mother promised that she would visit me regularly and fussed over me using the corner of her sleeve to wipe at a smear of dirt on my face. Don't worry about me, Mom, I said impatiently. Finally, she let me go. As soon as Master returned from showing my parents out, it was as if something in the air had changed. The students quietly went back to their chores or private practice. The Master took my hand and showed me around the academy, pointing out things I might have overlooked: the ancestral shrine, the kitchen, the large outdoor shower area. We sat at the long table, and Master smoked cigarettes while asking me about my family and my old home on the peak. We talked for hours, until late in the night. Then Master, watching a yawn split my face, told me it was time to go to bed. He called out to the other students, who filed into the main hall carrying neatly folded blankets. Then, wishing me a good night, he patted me on the head and left the hall for his quarters elsewhere in the academy. Getting up from the table, I watched as the kids, talking quietly among themselves, arranged their blankets around the edge of the practice room. We sleep on the ground? I asked one of the boys I played with earlier in the day. He ignored me and flopped down on his stomach, pulling his old blanket around his body. I felt the thump of cloth against my back and turned around. It was my nemesis, Yuan Long. He'd thrown a roll of fabric at me, a blanket as moth-eaten and worn as the others, and his face worn his customary scowl. Quit screwing around, new boy, he said. Lights out in 10 minutes, unless your ass is too dainty for the floor. I lay down in the corner and spread the blanket out, bending my arm into a pillow for my head. Soon, even Yuan Long had readied himself for sleep and shouted, "Lights out!" And the room went dark. I rolled onto my side and quickly fell asleep. The next day, I opened my eyes to find that all of the other students had already awakened. Master and Big Brother stood at the front of the room, leading the boys and girls through a grueling set of warm-up exercises. Kicking aside my blanket, I stretched and wandered through the ranks of sweating students, whistling to myself and laughing at their expressions of exertion. Some of them shot dirty glances at me, but I didn't care. No one was telling me what to do. No one was yelling at me, and for the first time in my life, I was completely free to do whatever I wanted. Breakfast had already been served, eaten, and cleared, so I wandered into the kitchen looking for something to munch on. It was empty, and all the food locked away in the pantry. That was too bad. I was dying of hunger. Then I remembered that my mother had left me a bag of snacks and sweets. It was still sitting in the entry room, along with my small suitcase. Rummaging quickly through the bag, I found some oranges and a handful of plum candy. I ran back to the practice hall and sat down in one corner, watching the students work while peeling an orange and stuffing the segments into my mouth. After an hour, the master called a short break, and the students broke into smaller groups to talk and catch their wind. I had finished one of the oranges and set the other aside for later, and was sucking intently on the piece of plum candy when a harsh voice broke my concentration. "Hey, new boy, where'd you get that food?" It was Yuan Long, his white shirt damp with perspiration and his face mean. Behind him was his constant sidekick, an equally tough older kid named Yuan Tai. "My mom gave it to me," I said, my mouth full. "What'd you say?" said Yuan Long, his eyes narrowing. Yuan Tai stepped forward and stuck his hand in my face. "When you speak to an older student, you better call him Big Brother," he said. "Say it." "My mom gave it to me, Big Brother," I repeated, gritting my teeth. "Apologize to your big brother," Yuan Tai said. "I'm sorry, Big Brother." Yuan Long's face lit up with a victorious smile. "Yuan Tai, what's the penalty for disrespecting your elders?" Yuan Tai thought for a moment. "Penalty is no more snacks, Yuan Long." Yuan Long snatched away my second orange, while Yuan Tai pried open my hand to remove the remaining piece of plum candy. "Hey," I said. "You got a problem, new boy?" Yuan Tai said. The space between their two heads was suddenly filled by Master's stern and questioning face. "Is there a problem here?" he said, an edge in his voice. "No, Master," said Yuan Long. "Kong, said Master, his eyebrows quirked. "Everything is fine, Master," I chirped, folding my hands in my lap. The two older boys went back to their practice, and I sat humming my mom's favorite song to myself, watching them happily until lunch. Between my own snacking and the demands of Yuan Long and the older boys, my bag of treats my mom had left me disappeared quickly. On the 6th day of my stay at the academy, I found myself left with only a bag of walnuts still in their shells. I'd never had a walnut before, and getting the nut meat out of the shell seemed as if it would be a real pain. Master never left out anything that we could use to hurt ourselves or one another. There wasn't a mallet or a knife or even a heavy pot inside in the kitchen. Squeezing the nuts in my hands just left painful bruises on my palms, and I didn't want to risk my teeth on the rock-hard shells. Out of frustration, I began hammering the nuts against the counter until the bag ripped and the walnuts sprayed out and around the kitchen. Yelping, I began gathering up my last treasured snacks, only to realize that one of the nuts had rolled completely under the refrigerator and was now resting in the dusty crevice between the refrigerator and the wall. I was a plump kid, but still small enough to reach behind the fridge, and I stuck one arm into the depths of the crack, stretching my hand as far as it would go into the dark, dirty space. After a few minutes of scrabbling, I felt a tightness around my waist. Someone had grabbed hold of my pants and was pulling me back out into the light. It was the master, and with him were biggest brother Yuan Long and Yuan Tai, the last wearing an evil grin. "See, master," said Yuan Tai, "I told you he was playing around with the electric socket." "No, I wasn't. I was just trying to reach my nuts," I shouted. Yuan Long sniggered. "You should have kept your hands in your pockets, new boy." Master pushed me out of the kitchen and into the practice hall. I was terrified. I'd never seen kindly old master looking the way he looked just then. His face was angry and cold, and I had a sudden flashback to my father's expression just before he was about to punch me hard. "Kong Song, you are fond of snacks, are you not?" Master asked. I nodded, then shook my head, not knowing which reaction would save me. Probably neither. "I think it is time for some jiajiangmian." Jiajiangmian is a spicy noodle dish made with meat and served cold. The look on Master's face suggested that he was not headed for the kitchen. The other kids gathered in a wide circle around me, grinning as if they were aware of what was about to come next. Master picked up a thin, supple rattan cane. He pushed me down to the ground and told me to lie flat on my belly. I closed my eyes and gritted my teeth. I felt my pants being roughly drawn down to my knees as my belly and thighs collapsed on the polished wooden floor. Then a whistle and a crack, a sound that I registered in my brain just a flash before the pain ranged from my buttocks up my spine. I screamed. The taut, bone-hard smack of the cane was more agonizing than my father's bare palm or even his white leather belt, the worst I'd ever felt against my skin before. And each rip of the cane, each jolt of torment was followed by another, in steady, staccato rhythm, until my throat was hoarse and my buttocks almost numb. 6 strokes, delivered with all of my master's force. 6 raised and bleeding welts across my tender skin. I began to cry, shouting for my mother and father to take me away. I wanted to go home. I wanted to go anywhere rather than stay at this place, which had gone from paradise to hell in one hot instant. "Be quiet," thundered Master, perspiring from the workout of my beating, "unless you want a second helping." I shut up. I saw out of the corner of my tear-filled eyes that Yuan Long and Yuan Tai were laughing at me. I saw smiles on most of the younger kids, but they were smiles that simply stated fact. We were there too. Now it's your turn. Welcome to the club. Master gestured a dismissal with his cane and walked out, allowing the rest of the lads to cut short their practice and escape to private things. I lay alone on my belly for what seemed like hours. Everything was over. I knew it now. The easy living, the freedom. The kindness of the master had been a sham, and my loneliness was now complete. Even with my uncertain sense of time, I knew that I told my parents I wanted to stay here for a very long time, longer even than I'd been alive. But I didn't want to live anymore. Not if my days were going to be like this. Not with the fear of more pain and, even worse, this feeling of hollow aloneness in my heart. Then, I felt a hand on my back. One of the boys had returned, the one who many weeks ago showed me how to do a backflip and nearly brought himself a dish of jiajiangmian from Big Brother. He had a towel in his hand, dripping with cold water from the shower. "It'll be easier if you put this on your butt," he said. "I know." I managed a smile and took the towel from his hand. The next morning, Master brought me in front of the hall and officially introduced me to the other students. "This is our newest student," Master said in a solemn voice. "He came to us as Chen Kong-sung, but now that he is a part of our family, he must take a new name. Please welcome your brother, Yuan Long." The students came up as a group and surrounded me, some squeezing my shoulders, some patting me on the head and back, others taking my hands in theirs. They welcomed me. I was one of them. Welcome to the club. Master Yu's personality seemed to have changed overnight. Before my initiation, he'd been my protector and my only friend, and we'd spend evenings drinking tea, eating cookies, and talking about my favorite subject, me. Afterwards, I seemed to have turned invisible. I became just another problem, one whose solution was rigorous training, ear-shattering lectures, and the occasional beating. I quickly learned to watch the other children carefully. Whenever they stood up, I stood up. If they sat down, I sat down. Whatever they said, I said, and whatever they did, I did. Not only did it make it less likely that Master would single me out for punishment, but it also helped to create a bond between us, me and my brothers and sisters. I made friends with many of the younger children, and even my worst enemies, Yuan Long and Yuan Tai, stopped making me the constant target of their torments. Things got better. Life was hard but simple. I slowly grew used to the routine. This was a typical day at the academy. At 5 a.m., biggest brother would wake us up, first with a shout, then a brisk shake of our shoulders if we didn't get up immediately. Then we'd fold and put away our blankets and march outside to the stairway that ran up the side of the building, climbing to the roof. Making as little noise as possible to avoid disturbing the neighbors, who were all still asleep, we'd run several laps around the rooftop just to wake up. After the run, we'd march back down to breakfast, the sweat still wet on our bodies. There was no time to stop for a bathroom break, because it was Master's theory that any need to use the toilet in the morning meant we hadn't been training hard enough. As he put it, all of the body's toxins should have been sweated out during the morning run. And so, the first time I made the mistake of asking to relieve myself, I was given 10 extra laps to run. Breakfast itself was barely a meal, just a bowl of congee, which is a thin rice porridge. The idea was to fool the stomach into thinking it was full, but not to eat so much as to get in the way of practice, which lasted for 5 or 6 straight hours with barely a chance to breathe. Warm-up exercises, then footwork training, martial arts, and acrobatics, all performed in tight ranks in the academy hall, boys and girls together. The most difficult instruction we had was in the aerial maneuvers that give Chinese operas visual splendor, flips and somersaults, all learned and practiced without a net or harness. After watching the others do their backflips with ease and grace, I was eager to learn. Master, gratified at my enthusiasm, told Yuan Long to teach me how. Without warning, he grabbed me by the waist and flipped me over. All of a sudden, the room was whirling around, and the floor was much too close to my head. "You have to stiffen your neck and head," said Big Brother. And then they told me to try it on my own. That was the sum total of the teaching I had in this spectacular and dangerous maneuver. After a series of tries on my own, under Master's watchful eye, I managed to land awkwardly on my feet, but not before some terrible and frightening falls. I was lucky, escaping with just bruises, head bumps, and the occasional twisted limb. Some kids weren't so fortunate. When a really bad injury happened, there was no doctor around to make sure that no permanent damage had occurred. In fact, being hurt or sick was seen by Master as an attempt to get out of practice. In his eyes, if you could move, you could fly. So anything short of a crippling handicap was just a lame excuse, so to speak. Lunch at the school was a more substantial meal than breakfast, consisting of soup made from tofu and green vegetables, and then rice with fish. After eating, we were finally allowed to go to the bathroom. Then we moved on to the most essential and painful part of our training: flexibility exercises. Opera performers have to be able to do a complete leg split, horizontally on the ground and vertically, holding one leg high above the head. And so we practiced splits against the walls, against the floor, against everything. As soon as the exercises began, the room would be full of howling, because frankly, it hurt like hell. The worst thing was that if you couldn't split all the way, Master would send biggest brother over to push your body down until it felt like your joints were going to come apart. And if you couldn't do it alone, he would call other older students over, and they would hold your legs apart while he pushed you. It didn't matter how much or how hard you cried, eventually, you'd go down into a spin. It was a nightmare. Oh God, it was awful. And it would go on for hours, until walking or sitting or even standing was agony. After we practiced splits, we would move on to handstands. Master decreed that his students would have to be able to stay on their hands for at least half an hour at a time. After 15 minutes, our arms would grow limp, our blood would rush to our heads, and our stomachs would begin to turn flip-flops. But we couldn't show any weakness at all. A limb that moved would receive a whack from the Master's rattan cane, and woe to the student who allowed himself to fall over. After practice, we'd be divided into groups, although after doing splits for hours, we felt divided already. Some of us would be sent to do chores, like washing dishes, cleaning the hall, or tending to the ancestral shrine. The rest would go to singing or weapons instruction. Then came dinner, which was just a larger version of lunch. After dinner was another training session, though less rigorous and more fun than the morning and afternoon sessions. This is when we'd learn interesting things like kung fu and face painting and the proper way to use props and opera costumes. All in all, between our morning and afternoon and evening sessions, we'd practice more than 12 hours a day. Training would go on until bedtime, which was midnight. All of us students, from the 6-year-old newcomers to the biggest brothers and sisters, had the same schedule, 5 a.m. to 12 a.m. 5 hours of sleep, and then another day of training, day after day, 7 days a week. Free time was rare, and a cause for celebration. Opportunities to go out, away from the academy, were even rarer. So, until we grew old and skilled enough to perform, the gray walls of the Chinese Drama Academy were nearly all the world we knew. The system we lived under at the school was simple and straightforward. Master believed in just three things: discipline, hard work, and order. Discipline came quickly and painfully, measured in strokes of the cane. Hard work was the rule of the day. A few minutes of stolen rest often meant an hour of extra practice for the unlucky student caught slacking off. And order. Order was imposed by a strict line of command that placed master at the top, never to be disobeyed or disrespected, then his wife, madame, followed by the instructors who taught singing, boxing, and weapon skills, and then us students at the bottom. Even among the students, there was an order. Each of us was ranked by seniority, with the biggest brother, the one who had been at the school the longest, at the top, and the littlest, the newest student, at the very bottom of the entire heap. The order was never to be challenged. If a brother who was more senior told you to do something, you did it. If you told a more junior brother to do something, he did it. And if master gave a command, everybody jumped. The order was enforced by the fact that anyone who disobeyed it was beaten soundly, either by the master's cane or among students by the simpler but not any less painful means of a hard swung fist. Seniority didn't just mean power, it also paid off in a more direct fashion in the only currency that meant anything at the academy: food. Seating at meal times was arranged from top rank to bottom, and all dishes were passed down the table from the master to madame, to the instructors, to biggest brother, and finally, after dozens of other hands had touched it, to littlest brother, by which time almost nothing would be left. As littlest brother, I'd stare in horror as dishes of meat or fish worked their way along the row, getting smaller and smaller until just a bone or some scraps of fat were handed to me, very cold and not at all filling. These were grim times indeed for a boy who loved to eat. As harsh as it may have seemed, it was a system that had worked for decades, even centuries, producing the very finest acrobats, singers, and fighters that the world had ever seen. One day, as we went through the rigors of our afternoon workout, the creaking of the hallway door announced visitors. A young couple with a small boy